Opening words for today are written in an article by Tim Brownlee. It says, culture is one of the most powerful forces in our world. It controls what we see, how we make sense of our world, and how we express ourselves. As people from different cultural groups work together, values sometimes conflict. When we do not understand each other, we sometimes react in ways that make a partnership ineffective. Often we are not aware that cultural differences are the root of miscommunication. Sometimes the same culture can have a misunderstanding. And also from Sior Taylor, from The Conversation Starts Here, A Perspective of Self-Culture in the American Society. She wrote, "Differences simply act as a yarn of curiosity, unraveling until we get to the other side." That Which Unites Us, by Sarah Eileen Lawal. May we remember our shared humanity, our universal kinship, our interdependence and connectedness, and breathe together. Breathing in love and breathing out peace. May we recognize the spark inside all of us, even those we are not quite sure about. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Cecillia Montesdeoca, who I met when she came as a fellow to Dakota Resource Council as part of her master's program. She's a friend and a traveler and someone I'm glad my daughter gets to know. And she's studying anthropology. She has a degree in cultural anthropology and community health education, and is just an all-around fine person, and I hope you get to know her a little bit better as I have gotten to know her. So please help me welcome my friend Cecillia Montesdeoca.
Great, so thank you. My name is Cecillia Montesdeoca. I'm from Illinois. I came to North Dakota starting in July to work with Dakota Resource Council as part of my master's program. So I'm a master's student at Illinois State University doing a degree in cultural anthropology and applied community and economic development, which is a mouthful. But everyone in my cohort has already had some type of service experience, whether that be with Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, or other nonprofit work. So therefore, we do a one-year condensed coursework on campus, and then we do a one-year field work, working with different organizations across the country, doing a lot of different issues. So here I'm working with Dakota Resource Council as a community organizer, which I enjoy a lot, and as I tell people, is ideal for an anthropologist, and hopefully you'll piece together why. So what is anthropology? I honestly didn't know the formal term or idea of anthropology until I was in college, and I was trying to figure out what academic path to take. I knew I wanted to do something worldly. I just got done studying abroad in Brazil during high school, so coming into community college, I had to pick what's next and how can I still go somewhere and have a job. And so I thought, to have a career involving other cultures, I guess that's international business, which I hate economics and whatnot. So I took one econ class and decided that wasn't for me. So then I thought, international relations, but I don't really see myself doing international policy. So I guess that's all there is. That's all I was brought up to think of, what is a proper career engaging with other cultures. And it wasn't until a friend of my sister's told me about anthropology and the different subfields and that you could study other cultures as a profession, as an anthropologist. So in the United States, the field of anthropology, which is the study of humankind, actually has 4 subfields. Biological, which is the study of human evolution. Archaeology, which is the study of material culture. Linguistics, the study of languages. And then cultural anthropology, which is the comparative study of human societies and cultures. Or what I like to tell people, it's really the study of everyday life. Some people bring it to the most simple term of making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. And people that have traveled to other places and when they return home, might describe this as reverse culture shock. You go somewhere and you spend an extensive amount of time and you come home and everything is just really weird. And that's because our culture is something that is learned and it's shared, and it's native to our own group. Therefore, anything outside of that seems rather arbitrary. So when you go somewhere, you're like, whoa, that's weird, why do you do that? And when you bring that back home, our everyday life can be very foreign to a lot of people, and sometimes I get caught up in being overly critical to everyday life where people don't know where my mind is. But small things like applying makeup every day. Makeup is such a weird ritual, to paint your face, to go outside, or or to wear certain attire when you go to an event because you know it could be condemned, basically, if it's not appropriate. If I was to come in here, well, this is a pretty welcoming group, so maybe not, but I think, I grew up in a very kind of traditional Catholic church where you had a very strict way of behaving in that context, and you knew that because you're brought up with that culture that is learned and shared. So culture essentially teaches us what is right and wrong, and it's informative because it allows us to look at our past, our present, and where we're going. So while I'm a formal anthropologist by training, I would say I grew up with a very anthropological mindset. My family is originally from Mexico, so I was able to grow up with two cultures simultaneously. And we were fortunate enough that my parents would take us to Mexico when they had the opportunity as we grew up. And it was always important for us to know where we come from and their culture and their family and their way of being, but also their values. And as we grew up, my father especially would emphasize that, people will tell you that the way we live is poor or that we're not right or developed or whatever because you might live in a small village where we used to have to walk to get water. But he was saying that's not who we are. That's not how we see ourselves. We are people that don't need to overconsume, from that buying groceries to sustain you all week to buying beds for every individual person. That's just who we are. But even then, he helped me be even more critical beyond that, recognizing what is Mexican, as in Mexico was also colonized. And at times we forget to recognize the indigenous cultures of that place. And a lot of people, I was speaking with a person here at a Lakota language lesson, and I was relating some of the words to Spanish, and he was saying that, yeah, Spanish is also, because I associate that with culture, right, like Mexican culture, but he was saying, don't forget about the indigenous languages that were there before Spanish. Those are true languages of that area. And also in my own world back home in Illinois, so I am from a town called Bloomington Normal, and it's right in the middle of Illinois. And it's a decent-sized town, and it's really interesting because my parents used to live in Chicago, and I have a lot of family there. So seeing a very urban lifestyle, like lots of, well, for us too, it's like lots of families, lots of generations in one household, like little space, just a lot of diverse areas in one geographic area. And then compared to this rural Illinois community that my mom grew up in where nobody locks their doors, everybody walks to someone's house, and everybody knows everyone's grandkids, even if they don't live there. So I grew up thinking like, okay, there's a lot of different ways to live, and I get it because I'm a part of that. And I think that's a lot of what we don't have for people who aren't able to, get exposed to other cultures that are beyond their own. They're not allowed to think as critically when they look outside and see other cultures. So this type of mindset of comparing is really important to me, not only as an anthropologist doing my grad school work here, but I think for the job that I do at Dakota Resource Council as an organizer, and I would say for anyone doing any type of work where you work with people, which we all do in some capacity, we need to recognize that what can you bring, what can you relate to already, and what do you just need time to understand before you can get engaged. I work a lot with oil and gas organizing, and I didn't grow up with any of these issues in Illinois. I've never seen a flare. I've never seen a pump jack, So who am I to kind of take lead in a way for some things? I'm there to help facilitate. I'm there to listen and kind of be the worker bee. That's what I tell people. Because that culture and that history and those challenges are not mine. That doesn't mean I can't bring something to the table. That doesn't mean that I kind of take over, but I recognize that I need the time to kind of understand and then integrate myself. So a big turning point for anthropology, which started off basically as documenting everything that's exotic and foreign and just like, oh, cool, everyone's so different. Let's write this down and put it in a book. Was really in the late 1880s with the anthropologist Franz Boas, started using this term called cultural relativism, which is essentially people needing to take themselves out of their own culture and looking at someone else's culture through their own context, which sounds very basic. It makes a lot of sense, but that's something that we don't really do in our everyday lives. And when we don't do that, it ends up basically judging other cultures because that doesn't fit with our own. It doesn't fit with our values. It doesn't fit with our ideology and our history. And I think that people don't engage with this because it is complex. Culture is very complex, and when people sometimes surface level culture, it's dance, it's clothing, it's food, it's language, and kind of the easy things that people can engage with, but people often overlook the political and social challenges that people have faced historically to lead to that moment, and that's what anthropologists look at. They look at everything that has brought a culture to that moment. And I think as an American culture, we don't put a lot of emphasis on that social political tension because we don't like it, and I think we have a lot of ownership in kind of bad things that have happened historically and continue to not want to engage with that tension there. But I think a new age is upon us, which is great. I think that I know, especially in my lifetime, the internet has changed a lot of things. And it has allowed us to be connected in a whole new way. And a lot of that is just visibility. We're able to see directly what other people are experiencing around the world and in our own backyard. And a lot of that, too, is that everyday people have the powers of media to some degree in their own hands. So before we were used to people giving us only one narrative. Mainstream news was, at first when it came out in the 60s, like everyone saw it as a public responsibility that these broadcast networks had to the people. And kind of that has, now it's about who brings in the best ratings to make ads more valuable. But we have people who are able to share their own story through their own media, use your phone, write a blog, whatever. Facebook Live, I think, is the greatest thing ever now because we can see immediately what's happening to people around the world. But it allows us to provide an alternative narrative to the way that things have always been told, which is super powerful. And I think for us, being able to see other people's experiences and hear their stories not only sparks empathy, but sparks curiosity. And I think that curiosity is essential to be critical of our own culture. And I think with that, this new form of transparency is bringing on something great to American culture. For some of us who are willing to engage, which I bet this group is, because you guys are pretty progressive, is a sense of vulnerability, which I think is something that American culture lacks. We don't like to feel inferior to any other culture, but we want to be on top. We want to be the best country that there is, and we have the best everything, but we don't have a lot of great things like healthcare and education, Yeah, so I think that sense of vulnerability and owning it and engaging it is something that is going to help us as a Western American culture move forward and start to heal with a lot of wrong that's been done over history. So some everyday steps to being an anthropologist. This is what I have. Because I think these are just things that we should carry in our daily life. And anthropologists, it's hard to say. We do research, but it's not as if I'm studying you. And a lot of people joke while I'm here, while I'm doing my project, the anthropologist is here and she's studying us. But I'm here to collaborate. I'm here to be engaged with people. And anthropologists use a lot of different methods to do their research. It's qualitative and quantitative, and as you know, just using strictly quantitative methods can easily be skewed to only show one story, and they're not very holistic. And they oversimplify the complexity of everyday life and culture. So first, time. Time is a huge requirement. To do a formal study, a good study with a group, they ask that it's at least 2 years of living with the group, so it's not a reporter who comes down and spends like a week here and interviews some people and then, okay, cool, I got it. I read a lot. I interviewed 3 people. Cool. And that article might be great and well-informed, but it's not. You need the time to spend there to get to know people and constantly refine your position. And your project should essentially be something very different by the end, because if it's the same thing throughout, then you haven't really gained anything during that time. This is something that I'm personally experiencing with my project with DRC. I really didn't know until 4 months later what I wanted to write about or what I felt was the core of what our group and our members wanted their story to be. The second is interaction, and we consider this participant observation. So before, anthropologists would just kind of watch people and write what was happening. They would say, oh, okay, here we see the mother is giving someone some food and whatever, just be the fly on the wall observer. But that's not how you It's not how you learn about people. You need to be engaged with people. And here it's super heightened for me because the radio programs are different. The way that the government is run is very overtly different. Social media put on by newspapers is different. Everyday conversation is different. And so those are the ways that we participate. We participate in those everyday life activities. Textual and visual analysis, like I said, people have their own way of telling a story, and I think with Standing Rock, we can clearly see two big different stories coming together. Interviews, doing a formal interview with someone, and while it is a formal interview, it's very casual, it's open-ended, and it's semi-structured, so you might have some basic questions that you want answered, but you're just allowing that conversation to go wherever people take it, and usually that's how you figure out the rhythm of the stories. Let's see, collaborative research is key, and I think that's the type of anthropology that I'm interested with, is how do we take these people's stories and share it to new outlets, or help share the complexity of that stories that a lot of people don't want to recognize is there. And that requires being in constant dialogue. Like I said, you spend so much time doing your research or whatever, living your everyday life, and we want you to arrive somewhere new and more informed, and then take that and go on to the next level, right? And that's something that we want to do every day, I think, to just be better people. But I think that there are some aspects of our culture that condemn that, calling people like flip-floppers or whatever who might change on their elected position, which can be harmful, but it's also, we want people to be open to change, but I think that we don't reinforce that. So where do we move on from here? I say we take these practices into our everyday life, that we engage this new sense of vulnerability, and we encourage other people to be vulnerable through everyday actions. And for example, I was waiting for my car to get fixed, and I had to wait 15 minutes, and the people there just kept talking about how disruptive the protests were here, and just kind of narrating in between themselves and dialoguing between themselves. And then I asked, well, isn't that the same thing that happened way back when this continent was settled? These people were living their everyday lives, and it was disrupted by someone else, and them just saying, no, that's not the point, that's not what I'm saying. And I said, no, it is the point, so how can we, getting people to change that everyday narrative is going to be really important, and how we progress, and how we can recognize and value other cultures for their own uniqueness, and an understanding that we can find common ground, but in some ways we will never be at that same level, because you just can't. Let's see, that's really all I have. There's a really good book called Ishmael by David Quinn. If you haven't read it, it's great, and I think it's not a scholarly work, but it's a great anthropological read. And that's it. I just encourage you all to stay curious and stay kind. So that's all I have.
As drops of rain that find each other and build to become a track, a rivulet, a stream, a river, a sea, so are we drawn together, so are we fortunate to find each other, so are we bound together on this shared passage toward an unknown ocean and eternity. Go in peace.